Hi everybody, and welcome to the Trestles Tools video channel. Today I'm going to show you how to change the bearings on the Zoe. Now you'll see here that the top rail and the motor have got some play. Today I'm going to show you how to change the bearings on the Zoe. Now you'll see here that the top rail and the motor have got some play. What that indicates is that 4 bearings inside here have worn considerably, and that could be through several things: longevity of use, and also if you don't keep this top rail clean, you can create a cutting paste on here that will abrade those bearings. So every time I sell these saws, I tell people to keep this rail clean. If you do that, then you'll get longevity from the bearings and you won't get that problem. So what I'm going to do next is take you into the little office area we have set aside and show you the equipment that you'll need to undertake the change of these bearings. So now we've come into the warmth of the little office. I've decided to take a seat and show you all the component parts that you got, tools that you're going to need for the job. But first I thought I'd explain about the bearings. So this bearing is like a flying saucer type shape. It's made of a black nylon. In the centre you have a circlip holding 2 roller bearings inside. So the circlip holds those bearings in, and you see the centre there where the main bolt goes through to hold it in its retaining position. So you need 4 of these bearings, 2 on each side. 2 in the actual machine are captive, and the other 2 are set so that you can adjust them in and out onto the rail, and I'll show you how to do that when we actually do the assembly. So the first thing you need is a little tray. It's a grubby old thing, it's seen plenty of service, but that's to put all the nuts and bolts in to keep them safe so you don't lose any, and in the process you can add a little bit of a lubrication just to keep those nuts on the bolts running nice and freely. Then I've got some handy wipes and some cloth just to keep your hands and any spillages or grease on the machine clean. A small bottle jack, which we'll use in conjunction with this piece of wood and some straps to hold the top rail up while we slide the motor assembly off of the rail. You don't necessarily have to have a bottle jack. You can cut a piece of wood, a bit of 3x2, just to prop the main rail on the saw up so that it doesn't get damaged in the process. Need 2 13 or M13 ring spanners, an M13 ratchet and socket, and a 17mm socket, 2 Allen keys, 1/6 and 1/8, an impact driver, and you're good to go. What I would stress is that you use decent quality tools so that you avoid rounding up the nuts and also making damage to the hexag bolts. So that is crucial. Decent tools and you won't ruin the bolts. So now you've got your list of tools, I'll take you back to the machine and I'll show you how we do this process. Another couple of pieces of equipment that I find useful when doing this is the trestles, or the horses, whatever you want to call them, a nice big board to create a platform so that when we take the motor off here we've got a comfortable platform to work on while we change those bearings. So I only put that together once I've done the disassembly here, and you'll see that as we go along. I've also got another piece of board here. This is a piece of old kitchen worktop, but a piece of ply or even a piece of 3x2 will do. the idea is that you span it across the whole of the bed of the saw, and what this does is it spreads the load when you prop the rail up here. So I'll use this for now, and as I say, you can use whatever you like, provided you don't point load this bottom tray. Okay, so what I've got now is I've got the platform ready. I've taped a piece of 3x2 on the underside of the rail. That gives that some stability and also gives me a jacking point to hold the rail up. The rail is set in its exact position so that we don't get any damage to this end when we take the motor off. I'm also going to strap the rail around the whole body of the machine. It's crucial that this end doesn't get moved in the process of taking the motor off at the other end. So as an extra precaution to stop this sliding across left or right, I've strapped the rail down to the whole body of the machine. I've actually used plastic ties. I sometimes use a normal strap belt, a ratchet strap. Thing to do is don't overdo it. What you're trying to achieve is just keeping this rigid, and then that protects everything before we start to dismount the motor. So I'm now going to start breaking down the housing so that we can slide it off the rail and onto the bench. First thing you need are your two M13 spanners, and we're going to undo these 4 bolts here with the lock nuts on and completely remove them. So that's the first one. You see I've got the bolt, the lock nut and the nut that comes from the housing. So I'll just get my tray and I'll make sure I keep all these bolts together in the one tray. I might add these ones are pretty good. When you can undo them by your hand, you know the machine hasn't been abused. So that's the first 4 away. So take these 4 bearing adjustment bolts off, and now I've come to the business end. This is where we have to take this assembly off, which is the rail support. We have 4 bolts, this handle here and another bolt here. These are M13, this is M17, and obviously this one will come undone by hand. So you unwind that one. It also has the washer, so keep those in your box. Okay, this one next. With your socket set. I just slacken this off so that it's sort of finger tight, ready for when I've taken these off. Change the socket for your M13, and you'll find when you come back to reassemble, everything will be perfectly in line because you've taken the trouble to lock it all down in the right position. Again, these are coming out nice and clean. There's no rust. You find the whole of this assembly now will drop down. Okay. So we're now at the part now where we need to slide the motor assembly off the rail. And I'm sure you'll all remember Andy. He's our warehouse manager, a capable pair of hands. It's important that two people lift the motor off because, first of all, health and safety. You don't want an accident personally, and also you don't want to damage the integrity of the machine. So we'll show you where to hold it. You put your one hand here underneath this electrical box. I've got my hand firmly on the underside of the housing. Andy's got his hand firmly here and on the handle. And all we do is we slide it forward and we turn it on its back, and then I take control of it from this side. Okay. Let it go. And carefully turn it onto its back. Okay, so now I've got the machine on its back. I've supported it here with a piece of wood again. That's so we keep the whole of this assembly reasonably level for when we put the bearings back in later on. So we've got 3 bolts to take out here. They're M6, 1, 2 and 3. And then I've got 4 bolts to take out here, and they are M8. These 4 are the 4 that go through the bearings and hold them in position. These 3 here are what hold the casing together. And there are another 2, which I'll show you in a moment, which are just standard crosshead screws. So I'll just take these out first. The 2 on the outside are the longest ones, by the way. So you'll see when we've got the 3 together that you'll have 2 long ones and 1 slightly shorter. Swap the Allen key for the M8. Now these are usually a little bit tighter because these are the ones that are holding the bearings in position. So that's those 3 and those 4. We've got 2 more to take out, and I'm going to use the impact driver to get those out. So I'll just go and get that from the other end of the saw and I'll be right back. Okay, so I've taken one out and it's on the underside here. You'll see it's very difficult to get a camera shot, but you will see this nut on the other side when you have a good look. Sorry, this little screw. And the second one is on this side. This one's really accessible and it's here. Okay. The moment of truth. So, there you go. Now you can see how much corrosive material gets in there if you don't keep the inside of this thing clean. So my suggestion is, you know, when you finish doing a job, get a power hose in there, or certainly try and give it a good clean out. You'll also see how the bearings have got messed up because they've not been kept clean properly. So you'll see I've got here in my hand the inner bushes. Now the purpose of these, there are 4, one on either side of the bearing. I'll just show you with the old bearings so that we don't contaminate the new ones. But the idea is when the bolt goes through, those first 4 bolts that I took out, which are these, that go through this housing allow this to be moved in and out towards the rail, and you'll see how I adjust those when I do the reassembly. But what is crucial is when you put the new bearings back, you must clean all these, you know, descale them, maybe on a little piece of emery paper, and certainly don't use a file, emery paper just to polish them back up. Clean this area here. You don't need to be so bothered about the pins here, but certainly this side, which is the adjustment side, definitely needs some attention. You know, make sure that the slots are clean and clear, well lubricated, and make sure that any rust or any contamination is removed from these bushes. And then obviously once this has all been cleaned up and these have been cleaned up, we can then start to reassemble with the new bearings. Also, it's important to tell you to not just clean the ones that are on the main body of the machine, but also on the lid as well. Clean all this up. Get rid of all this white debris, you know, the cutting residue. Okay, so while the cameraman's been having his cup of tea, I've taken the opportunity to clean a few bits and pieces and get them ready for the reassembly. So in the main body here, you've got these little tiny pyramid pieces that are actually part of the casting. There's two of those. And then you've got the flats here with the slot in, which is where the bolts go, where the bearings are allowed to slide across. So they need to be nice and free and clean inside. You see the same again there with the lid. I've done the general cleanup of that, clean the little pyramids and the little flats here. It's very important not to use grease in this assembly. What you'll find is if you get grease, you get a build-up of the cutting contaminants, and that will then eventually clog everything up. So you need to keep everything clean and free running at this stage. What I've done is I've put some timber as a packer underneath here to make sure that this bed is completely level. You need to do that because this is a delicate operation. It's a bit of a balancing act, but if this is level, the process is pretty simple. So on the bearing, as I said earlier, you've got the circlip which holds the centre bearings in, and what you're going to do is you're going to place these on top of these pyramids. You've got one on the front and one on the back, and then to correspond with those on the lid you have the same detail. So that's your first one. Second, that's that side taken care of. Now on the side which is the adjustment side, you have these bushes. You've got the fat bottom of it, and you've got the thinner reduced part there, which is the bit that goes into the bearing like this. So you sit those on there, front and back, again with the circlip facing down, and you balance that on there. Do the same at the back. Then you get the second bush and place that in the top. And when your lid goes on, these little lugs here correspond with the lugs at the back, and they become the part that the bearing sits into. This is where you need your steady hand. And that's it. Your bearings are now in the location position. What you now have to do is to put the bolts back in through the centre of the bearing and into the nut on the underside. So these are the bolts. One. Two. 3, 4. So the bearings are now in the right position. and you'll see that I can move this bolt back and to, which is the adjustment. Back and front are both running free. So what I'm going to do now is to put the other nuts and bolts in around the housing, and then put the bolts on the nuts on the other side of these retaining bolts. So as you can see, I've reassembled the whole of the carriage, bolted it all back together, and turned the saw back into the position where we can now lift it up back onto the rail. One thing to remember is the bolts on this side, that's the fan side of the motor, is that you must leave these slack, because those are the two bolts here and here that are the ones that you would adjust once you've got the saw back onto the rail. Those will be the ones that have got the travel to take the bearing in and out, so that it's nicely cushion fit on the rail. Okay, so we've slid the motor back on the top rail. It's a two-man process, the same as when we took it off. And the first thing you do then is you put the support arm back on, and for ease I always put the adjustment bar on first. That holds it in position. Then you can put the retaining bolt in here, and then the rail actually sits on a little shelf at the back here, so it will always be in the correct position for the 4 bolts to go in. And because you've already supported it in the early stages of the process, everything will just go back simple. You won't have to fight with the bolts, they will just go in so simple. These are the bolts with a standard washer and a lock washer. Don't lubricate these, you want them to go in and be as tight a fit as possible. Okay, so we're now at the final stages of the procedure of replacing the bearings. As I said earlier, we've replaced all of the end, mounted the rail and put the motor back on the rail. I've taken away all of the strapping that held the rail and everything secure, and the final part of the process is actually to adjust the bearings so that the motor sits on the rail and slides comfortably without any play in the motor. What you can see here at the moment is that, which is exactly what we started off with, but now it's got the new bearings in, I've got to align those bearings so that it becomes tight on the rail. So I've put the 4 adjuster bolts back in, and I've just done them to finger tight. I've also wound the lock nut all the way back to the end of the bolt, like that, and I've got them all in sort of fairly even. Now what you have to do now is you have to kind of cuddle the saw, because what you've got to do is you're lifting the saw this way so that the bearing sits comfortably in the far rail, like that. I'll show you that again. Lift it so the bearing is in the rail. Then you've got your 13mm spanners, and you'll find it's there as well. So it's there in that rail at the back. And then what you do is you tighten up, and that's pushing the bearing on this side in. Don't overdo it, but do it evenly. So we're still slack at the front, and we're still slack at the back, so we can wind in a little bit more. Just let that go out of the way. Do this very gently because you don't want to overdo it. So we're nearly there now. A little bit more on the front. Now I've overdone it. You see that? That's solid. So I've now got to open that back up. We're nearly there. Fraction back. And that's now comfortable on the rail with no play. And now I'm comfortable with that. It's a little bit on the tight side, but as you use the saw, it will bed in. So now what we have to do is we have to lock it down. So 2 spanners, one to hold the bolt itself and the other one to actually lock it. One to hold the bolt and one to lock. So after the final adjustment of the bolts onto the bearing and it's running nice and free, you must remember to tighten up the bolts that are actually running through the centre of the bearing. One and two. That's it. There you go. Check again, no play, and that completes the process. Hope you found it useful. We're always at the end of the phone if you need us, but I hope the video has done all the, or answered all the questions that you need.